We often think about, complicated diets or maybe really intense workouts when it comes to health.
Right.
But have you ever stopped to consider the power of something as, well, simple as walking?
Mm-hmm.
Could that everyday activity, something most of us just do, be a surprisingly good way to lower your risk of some pretty serious illnesses?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, if just moving a little more each day could have a bigger impact than we realize.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's precisely the fascinating question we're digging into today.
Okay.
We're diving deep into a recent study. It's from the University of Oxford, looking at the connection between your daily step count and the chances of developing 13 different types of cancer.
13 types. Wow. Okay, that definitely gets your attention.
It's a significant number, yeah.
Right.
And the findings, I think they really offer a fresh perspective on how we think about everyday movement and health.
And where are we getting this info from?
So the immediate source is a report in VinExpress Suck, and they're referencing the original research, which was published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine.
Got it. So our mission here is really to unpack this study, pull out the key findings, maybe some surprising ones,
Definitely.
and really understand what this could mean for, your daily life, your health.
Yeah.
Because that old idea of 10,000 steps,
Yeah.
maybe that's not quite the whole story.
Precisely, at least not specifically for cancer prevention based on this. Let's jump right into what really stood out.
Okay, let's do it.
So the main finding was that getting around 7,000 steps a day was linked to an 11% reduction in the risk of those 13 common cancers.
Okay, 7,000 steps, 11% reduction. That's specific.
It is, and what's interesting is if people increase that to about 9,000 steps daily, the risk reduction actually went up further to 16%.
16%. So a bit more benefit there.
A bit more, yes. But, and this is a really key point, going beyond that 9,000 step mark didn't seem to give much extra protection.
Okay, so diminishing returns after 9,000 steps for this outcome.
Exactly. It really makes you wonder if that widely pushed 10,000 step goal might be, well, maybe an oversimplification, at least for cancer risk.
Yes, 7,000 steps. That's definitely lower than the 10,000 we always hear about. Makes you question where 10K came from anyway, doesn't it?
It does.
So how did the researchers actually figure this out? What was the study designed like?
Well, it was quite large scale. They followed over 85,000 people in the UK.
85,000. Wow.
Yeah. And for 1 week, these participants were activity trackers. So that gave the researchers a really detailed picture of their daily steps, the intensity too.
Right, objective data.
Exactly. Then, crucially, their health was monitored for 6 years.
6 years.
6 years. Looking specifically for any new cancer diagnoses and how those diagnoses related back to the average daily steps they were taking.
Okay, 6 years is a pretty solid follow-up. That adds weight to the findings, I'd imagine.
It does. It allows for patterns to emerge over time.
Now, you mentioned something about walking speed. I kind of assumed faster, more vigorous walking would be better.
That's what you'd think, wouldn't you? But interestingly, the study found that hitting between 5,000 and 9,000 steps a day was linked to that lower cancer risk.
Okay.
And this connection held up pretty much regardless of how quickly people were walking.
Really? So pace didn't matter as much.
It seems for this specific benefit related to these cancers, the total volume of steps might be more important than the intensity.
Huh. That's actually kind of encouraging for people who prefer a gentler pace.
It is. It suggests the cumulative effect of just moving throughout the day might be the key thing here.
Fascinating. Okay, let's talk about those 13 cancers. That's quite a broad range. Can you list them out for us?
Sure. So the types of cancer where they saw this association were esophagus, liver, lung, kidney, stomach,
Okay.
endometrial cancer, that's the lining of the uterus,
Right.
myeloid leukemia and myeloma, which are blood cancers, and then also bowel cancer, head and neck cancers, rectal cancer, bladder cancer, and breast cancer.
That is quite a list. Covers some really common ones.
Yes, and as the report pointed out, many of these are cancers that have often been linked to more sedentary lifestyles in other research.
That makes sense. So thinking about the study group, the 85,000 people, what percentage actually developed one of these cancers during the 6 years?
It was actually a relatively small percentage overall. About 3% of the participants were diagnosed with one of these specific 13 cancers during that follow-up period.
Okay, 3%. So not a huge number, but with such a large study.
Exactly. The sheer size of the participant pool allowed them to detect these statistically significant links between step count and the risk, even with a relatively low overall incidence rate.
Right. And did they notice any differences in the types of cancers between men and women in the study?
Yes, they did mention that. For men, the most common cancers diagnosed from that list were bowel and lung cancer.
Yeah.
And for women, it was most frequently breast cancer, followed by bowel and endometrial cancer.
Interesting how those patterns differ. Now, the report also mentioned just reducing sedentary time generally. What did the study find there?
Yeah, that's another important piece. The research suggested that simply spending less time sitting and replacing some of that sitting time with light or moderate activity was associated with lower cancer risks.
So just getting up more often helps?
Seems like it. But interestingly, in this particular study, they didn't find clear evidence that specifically ramping up the intensity from light to moderate activity gave a significant additional boost against cancer risk.
So again, it kind of points back to the total amount of movement being key rather than necessarily how hard you're pushing.
It seems to reinforce that idea, yes. Less about high-intensity bursts, perhaps, and more about consistently being less sedentary overall.
That's a subtle but really important distinction, I think. Okay, the report also brought in Cancer Research UK's perspective. Why do they think physical activity helps prevent cancer? Let's get into the why behind this link.
Right, the mechanisms. Well, Cancer Research UK highlights a few key things. They explain that activity helps regulate hormone levels, like insulin. High insulin levels can sometimes encourage cancer cells to grow.
Okay, insulin control. Makes sense.
Activity also, crucially, helps with maintaining a healthy body weight. That's a big one.
Yeah, I saw they had a strong statement on weight.
Absolutely. They state very clearly that being overweight or obese is the second biggest preventable cause of cancer, right after smoking.
Second only to smoking. That's huge.
It is. They explain that excess body fat doesn't just sit there. It can cause inflammation and also lead to increased levels of certain hormones, which can make cells divide more often. And more cell division just increases the chances that something could go wrong, leading to a tumor.
Wow. So activity helps with weight, which in turn directly impacts processes linked to cancer development.
Exactly. Plus, they also mention benefits for the immune system and reducing the risk of certain infections that can be linked to cancer.
It's quite multifaceted then.
Very much so.
Okay, so for people listening, maybe thinking, all right, 7,000 steps, that sounds more doable than 10,000. But how do I actually fit that into my day? The report mentions some practical tips from a Dr. Hiri Morris.
Yes, Dr. Morris from Loughborough University. Her advice was really grounded and practical. She emphasized that you don't need to get all 7,000 steps in one big chunk, like a dedicated workout.
Which is good news for busy schedules.
Definitely. It's about accumulating steps throughout the day. She suggested simple things. Take the stairs instead of the elevator or escalator.
Easy win.
Go for a short walk on your lunch break. Even just pacing around when you're on a phone call.
I do that sometimes.
Me. And parking your car just a little bit further away from the shop entrance or your office. All these small bits of movement add up significantly over a day.
Those are all really manageable things, aren't they? Things most of us could probably build into our routine without a massive overhaul.
That's the idea, making movement a natural part of your day.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, the report also included some pretty sobering stats about cancer's impact, specifically in the UK.
Yes, the broader context is important. In the UK alone, there are over 400,000 new cancer diagnoses every single year.
400,000.
And sadly, about 167,000 deaths from cancer annually. But what's particularly concerning and highlighted in the report is this rising trend of diagnoses in younger adults, people under 40.
Younger adults. That seems counterintuitive.
It does, but the data shows it. Bowel cancer, for instance, is increasing rapidly in that age group. They cited projections suggesting a potential 90% rise in bowel cancer diagnoses among 20 to 34-year-olds between 2010 and 2030.
A 90% increase. That is truly alarming. It really hammers home why understanding prevention is crucial across all ages.
Absolutely. It's not just an older person's disease anymore, if it ever truly was.
And the report didn't just stick to the UK, right? It touched on the global picture, too.
Yes, broadening the scope really underscores the scale. Globally, cancer is a leading cause of death. We're talking nearly 10 million deaths every year.
10 million.
Which works out to about 1 in every 6 deaths worldwide. The World Health Organization lists the most common cancers globally as breast, lung, colorectal, that's bowel, prostate, skin, and stomach cancers.
Many overlapping with the study list.
Indeed. And the overall burden of cancer worldwide is actually increasing. Part of that is aging populations, but lifestyle factors play a huge role too. There are over 19 million new cases diagnosed globally each year, and unfortunately, that number is expected to keep rising.
Those global numbers just really drive home how massive this challenge is. And it highlights why any potential preventative step, even something seemingly simple like walking more, could be so incredibly significant.
Exactly. Every little bit helps on a population level and certainly on an individual level.
So let's try and wrap this up. If we had to distill the main takeaway from our deep dive into this Oxford study, what would it be?
I think the key message is that hitting around 7,000 steps a day seems to offer a pretty significant protective effect against a range of, well, 13 different cancers studied here.
Okay, 7,000 steps, significant protection.
And importantly, it feels like a more achievable goal for many people compared to the often touted 10,000 steps. It suggests you don't necessarily need that high bar to see real benefits, at least for this outcome.
It's a potentially less daunting target, making it feel more accessible.
Precisely. It's about integrating manageable movement into daily life.
So for you listening right now thinking about these findings, maybe the question is, what small, realistic changes could you make to nudge your step count up a bit, even getting closer to that 7,000 mark?
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely something to reflect on how this information might shift your perspective on the value of just, well, moving around more during your day.
Indeed. And hopefully this discussion has maybe sparked some curiosity for you, perhaps to look a bit more into those specific cancers we mentioned, or just generally explore the wider benefits of physical activity for your overall health and well-being. It's a powerful tool we all have access to.